from the News Channel 5 Network. This is OpenLine.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to OpenLine. I'm Chris Davis. Welcome here on News Channel 5 Plus. We have an important show for you tonight. We're taking a look at mass shootings in history and different trends and different insight that we can into this important topic tonight. Our guest is Dr. Laurie Woods from Vanderbilt University. Obviously, this is not a fun topic by any means, but it has been on the top of minds for so many Americans over the last couple of weeks. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
My pleasure.
So for one, give us a little bit of your background before we get into the conversation.
Well, I've been teaching at Vanderbilt for about 14 years, and I teach criminology, deviance, juvenile delinquency. I'm teaching a class on policing in America. My research is on, I teach research policing and also gun culture, and I've done some research in the past on hate crimes. Prior to being at Vanderbilt, where I finished my PhD, I was a law enforcement officer in California for 21 years. I was a street cop for 5, and then I worked narcotics for 16 years.
So obviously you have an interesting insight on these topics that you research. Obviously looking at data now, but you probably have some personal experiences that you can draw off of too when you're teaching your classes.
Oh, sure. Students love stories, so I tell them lots of stories. But yeah, I mean, I can look at data and I can look at theories and I can say, and this is how it works. And I actually told them this morning in class, because I'm teaching a summer class, that because I was a cop, I didn't know why we did what we did or how things worked. I just did it. And now in retrospect, I look back and say, oh, that's how that theory applies and that's how that works. And I tell them, you know, all we can say is this theory may explain some crime. That's all we can say about it, because nobody has the answer.
Sure, sure. Just kind of opening up the topic of mass shootings. For one, that term is obviously used quite a bit these days, but there's actually a number associated with what is a mass shooting.
4, that's the number that, I mean, that has changed over the years, but that's what, you know, 4 people shot, not including the shooter. If the shooter takes his or her, well, it's usually a male, his or own life.
Absolutely. And so when you're looking at a pattern, when do you feel like, is there a certain date where we can point to, oh, this is when the first mass shooting may have happened?
Well, in everyone's memory, the first mass shooting was the Columbine High School shooting. That's not the first mass shooting. I can't even remember when the first one was, but that's the one that we all point to. And that was the one that everyone, when there was a mass shooting, then they relate it back to Columbine. I mean, it's always back to Columbine. Not so much anymore, but that's 1999. That's where we started really paying attention.
Well, and I feel like especially, I think you're right in the fact that maybe it's drifted out of the conversation, but maybe re-entered with Uvalde recently with being back on the topic of school shootings. Do you feel like we learned enough from Columbine? I think I know the answer to that, but what would be your insight on that?
Well, nothing changed after Columbine. The only thing that changed was the protocol for police response. And then that has not always been followed. So that's about the only thing that changed, was we don't surround and wait for the cavalry or wait for the SWAT team. We go in. By we, I mean responding officers. That's about the only thing that changed. That, and, you know, looking at, there's something termed moral archaeology, and we use moral archaeology to look into the history of mass shooters to find out how we can blame them, how we can, particularly with kids, in the case of the Columbine High School shooters, Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris. Let's find out who they were, what they did, so that we can blame someone. We can put them in a box and say that's where they belong. And in the case with them, of course, people blame the parents. Where did the parents go wrong? And that's what we try to do in the cases of mass shooters. What is wrong with this person is that we can say it's them, but it'll never be me or anybody I know who does that. It will only be those people.
What do you feel like is the danger in putting them in that box?
They don't fit in the box. That's the problem. We don't, you know, everybody doesn't fit in the box. And the problem is that then we don't look at ourselves, we only look at them. And the truth is we need to look at ourselves and our culture if we want to make any real change. There's so many pieces. You can't just say it's one thing. There's so many pieces to it. and we have to be able to attack it from different directions.
You mentioned something really interesting that always, like you mentioned, comes up in these type of mass shooting situations, is especially if it's a younger person, which lately it seems like in the headlines it has been, certainly was with the 18-year-old in Uvalde. Right. Is there a role that parents play in that conversation?
Well, I'm not a psychologist, but of course there is. I mean, because parents play a role in raising their kids. The kids I can only speak to, because we don't know enough about the shooter in Uvalde to know. I mean, that's gonna take a long time. But in the case of the Columbine high school shooters, you know, both those kids had two parents in their home. They had parents who paid attention to what they did. They had gotten into small scrapes and had some juvenile arrests for something, I think it was theft, and had been released to their parents because, according to the judge who saw them, he admitted that when a kid came to him with just their mom, he was more likely to sentence them to some kind of more strict probation or jail time or juvenile hall time than if they came with both parents, because if there was a dad in the home, it was his belief that there was more control. So, of course, parents play a role in how they raise their kids, but they don't control everything.
Sure, absolutely. So just because it is obviously the most recent example, as somebody that studies this, what are some of the lingering questions that you have about what all happened, whether it's maybe from law enforcement or just the details in Uvalde?
Well, this is really a wait-and-see kind of situation, because there's been so much information and then corrected information, and then it makes me really sad to see, like this morning, one of the teachers who was shot was on television talking about seeing his kids killed, and I couldn't watch it. You know, I just thought, I just don't want to watch that. I mean, I don't know why it's doing it, maybe because it's therapeutic for him. I don't know, I'm not a therapist, but, you know, I couldn't watch it. And it's just really a wait and see. Of course, we want to know, you know, why didn't the police respond? How did the kid get it? You know, the guy get in to, you know, there was there was information and then misinformation about whether or not there was a door open, and we don't know. It's gonna take a long time before anybody really knows.
Sure, absolutely. Now, I know a lot of your research and emphasis goes into gun culture. I'm curious to get your insight on that.
Well, there's the AR-15, and we know that the majority of mass shootings are done with an AR-15 style rifle, assault style rifle, and there have been moves, of course, to ban that, and then, of course, there was who say, well, we have Second Amendment. But one of the things that I find fascinating about an AR-15 style rifle is why do you have one? I mean, actually, years ago when I was in the marijuana program in Northern California, I had an AR-15 rifle. It was a two-shot, right? And it was just kind of fun for shooting at Coke cans out in the middle of nowhere in the woods, but really just kind of a drag to carry around. It wasn't that useful. I mean, we had it in case we encountered bad people in the woods, I guess, but it was, you know, AR-15 rifle doesn't really have a use other than with, you know, the military version, the M16 or the M4, so it doesn't really have a use. I mean, hunters will say they hunt with it, but then you also talk to hunters who say, nah, we wouldn't use that.
Sure, and I know I have heard from law enforcement sources that say, you know, it's really not a good self-defense weapon, especially in a home, because of the high velocity, you know, nature of the rounds. Right. So when you do your research, what is the common answer for why someone wants to own one?
They're fun. That's it. I mean, people will disagree with me and they'll tell me lots of reasons, but when it gets down to it, they're cool and they're fun. I remember out of the range one day when I was in California, we had an Uzi, we had an M16, we had an AR-15, we had all kinds of automatic weapons, and they were a blast. It's not fun to reload them, right? But they were really fun. But any purpose other than military, they're cool.
Sure. We have our first caller into Open Line. Your phone line is open. Go ahead and ask your question or make your comment.
I was just gonna ask,
You're going to be a little ahead on the phone than you are watching, so if you just want to turn down your TV for a second and just listen to your phone, that may be a little bit easier.
Oh, okay. So, you're going to be a little ahead on the phone than you are. So, as you were talking about the AR-15 and how the shooter came into school and shot the kids, and like, it's really an eye-opener about how they really like shot the kids. You know, it really like opened my eyes. Like, I'm very surprised that they did such a thing, and how the police didn't, like, you know, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the call. And I think that caller really kind of encaptures kind of the national mood after something like this. It is just really hard to stomach.
It is, and I hesitate to criticize what law enforcement does because I wasn't there. It's horrible. It's horrible. How did the guy get in the building? But we also know that doors get left open at schools, and my 8-year-old goes to a small private school here, and I remember I was at an event and one of the moms was saying, well, I don't think this could happen at our school because we have some good security. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? It might. It might. They might let some parent in who has a gun. It might. We don't know.
Sure. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up, as a part of this conversation, I imagine there are probably people at home that may say, okay, I understand that an AR-15 style rifle may be dangerous, but I'm a good law-abiding citizen that doesn't do anything bad with my guns. Should my rights be infringed on that? I'm just curious your take on that.
That's the Second Amendment, and I don't know. That's, there's so much responsibility when it comes to guns, and I think that people forget that responsibility exists for things like all guns are loaded. All guns are loaded all the time until you have, we still have 1 to 2 kids killed or seriously injured every day because they picked up Uncle Joe's gun that was stuck in his Lazy Boy recliner and thought it was a toy. The responsibility you get it, and what do you do with it, whether it's an AR-15 or it's a Glock 44, whatever. Once you get it and it's not so exciting anymore, where do you put it? Where do you keep it? Do you stick it on top of the refrigerator? Do you hide it? When I talk to groups, I say, guess what? Your kids know where the Christmas presents are. They're going to know where that gun is too. So what do you do? And are you willing to kill somebody? Are you willing to kill somebody? Not just, I can't teach you to wing. We can't. Even cops miss about 4 out of the bullets that they fire. 1 out of 5 bullets goes into someone. So it's just a tremendous responsibility. And you own every bullet that leaves that gun. If you remember in the case of the shooting of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, the only officer charged was the one who fired into the apartment next door for negligent whatever they charged him with, because he made a mistake and shot into the apartment. He wasn't even where she was. So even cops miss. And are you willing to kill somebody? And what a lot of people, and this is actually someone at a Rotary meeting told me this, and I've since checked it with my insurance agent. If you shoot somebody in your house, your insurance isn't going to cover you if they sue you, or they fall down and break your favorite lamp, whatever. It's not going to cover you. It'll cover you for an accident, but it won't cover you for an on purpose. So if you're going to have a gun, you've got to remember all of those things, and you can't forget them. You can't ever forget them.
Absolutely. We need to fit in a break. We've got a couple callers on the line. Stay with us. We will get to your calls just right after this break. You're watching Open Line.